The concept of the deep state has long been a subject of intrigue, suspicion, and debate. Often described as a covert network of powerful individuals within government agencies, the military-industrial complex, and corporate elites, the deep state is believed by some to operate in the shadows, influencing policies and decisions without the consent of the people. Over the years, this hidden power structure has fueled numerous conspiracy theories, many of which claim that it manipulates governments and societies for its own benefit. When Donald Trump burst onto the political scene in 2016, he presented himself as the ultimate outsider, a man willing to challenge the establishment and take on the very forces of the deep state. His rhetoric was filled with promises to drain the swamp and dismantle the entrenched power structures that he argued were controlling American politics. However, as his presidency unfolded, the reality of his actions often told a different story, one where his policies, alliances, and decisions seemed to align more closely with the very elite interests he had sworn to dismantle. In this video, we will explore the complexities of Trump's relationship with the deep state, examining how he both fought against and, at times, enabled the forces of control that shaped the nation's political and economic landscape. From his economic policies that favored the wealthy to his failure to challenge entrenched corporate power, we will look at how Trump's actions and rhetoric often contradicted his promises, raising the question, was Donald Trump truly a champion for the people, or was he merely a tool of the very system he sought to destroy? Join us as we delve into the tangled web of politics, power, and influence, uncovering the hidden forces that shaped Trump's presidency, and why, in many ways, he became a puppet of the very deep state he once claimed to oppose. The term deep state refers to a hidden network of powerful, unelected individuals within government, intelligence agencies, military structures, and corporate entities who exert control over national and international affairs, often beyond the reach of democratic oversight. The idea suggests that while elected officials, such as presidents and members of Congress, appear to hold power, true control lies in the hands of entrenched bureaucrats, intelligence operatives, and corporate elites who ensure continuity of policy regardless of election outcomes. The origins of the term can be traced back to Turkey, where Darren Devlet, deep state, described clandestine networks within the military and intelligence services that operated beyond the control of democratic institutions. The concept, however, is not exclusive to Turkey. Throughout history, similar hidden power structures have been suspected in various governments, from ancient Rome, where elites in the Senate often overruled emperors, to Cold War-era United States, where agencies like the CIA conducted covert operations without public knowledge or approval. The modern American interpretation of the deep state is often linked to the permanent government, a collection of career bureaucrats, intelligence officials, and military-industrial figures who remain in power regardless of which political party is in office. This theory suggests that elected officials, even presidents, are often unable, or unwilling, to challenge these deeply embedded interests, making true systemic change nearly impossible. Critics argue that the deep state is merely a natural consequence of large governments, where long-term stability requires institutional continuity. However, those who believe in its existence point to examples of covert operations, media influence, and even political assassinations as evidence that a shadow government does, in fact, manipulate policy from behind the scenes. The concept of the deep state is often dismissed by mainstream sources as a conspiracy theory, but history provides ample evidence that powerful, unelected individuals have influenced governments behind the scenes. The key question is the deep state an organized group acting with a common agenda, or is it simply the natural inertia of a massive bureaucratic system that resists change? On one side, the conspiracy argument claims that the deep state is a deliberate and coordinated network of intelligence agencies, military leaders, corporate elites, and politicians who work together to push policies that serve their interests, often at the expense of democracy. Supporters of this view argue that events such as the assassination of JFK, the Watergate scandal, and the illegal surveillance programs revealed by Edward Snowden are proof that a shadow government operates behind the scenes, controlling the direction of the country regardless of election results. On the other hand, the institutional inertia argument suggests that the deep state is not necessarily a sinister, secretive cabal, but rather the inevitable result of large, complex government institutions that develop their own self-preserving cultures over time. Government agencies like the CIA, FBI, and Pentagon are filled with career bureaucrats who serve across multiple administrations and are resistant to sudden policy shifts. This means that even if a president tries to change the system, the deeply embedded structure of government, staffed by individuals with decades of experience, often slows down, redirects, or outright ignores policies that threaten its stability. A key example of this bureaucratic resistance was Donald Trump's presidency. Trump campaigned on draining the swamp and dismantling the deep state, yet his administration was repeatedly blocked, undermined, or delayed by officials within intelligence agencies, the Department of Justice, and even his own party. Some see this as proof that the deep state is actively working against elected officials, while others argue it simply reflects the slow-moving nature of a massive government machine that resists sudden disruptions. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a mix of natural bureaucratic inertia and deliberate influence by powerful individuals who shape policy behind closed doors. Whether one sees the deep state as a secret conspiracy or an unavoidable side effect of government, the end result is the same: those in power remain in control, regardless of the will of the voters. If the deep state exists, who are the people behind it? While some imagine a shadowy group meeting in secret to control the world, the reality is likely a mix of powerful institutions, unelected bureaucrats, intelligence officials, and corporate elites who influence government decisions from behind the scenes. One of the most frequently cited components of the deep state is the intelligence community, including agencies like the CIA, FBI, NSA, and DIA. These organizations hold massive amounts of classified information and operate in secrecy, making it difficult for even elected officials to fully oversee them. History has shown that intelligence agencies have conducted unauthorized operations, such as CNLPR, where the FBI illegally spied on civil rights leaders, or the CIA's involvement in coups around the world. Next is the military-industrial complex, a term famously warned about by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address. This refers to the powerful alliance between defense contractors, military leaders, and politicians who benefit from constant war and military expansion. Despite public resistance to prolonged conflicts, U.S. foreign policy has remained interventionist for decades, suggesting that unelected figures in the Pentagon and defense corporations play a major role in shaping war strategies. Another key player is the permanent bureaucracy, also known as the civil service, the thousands of career government employees who keep agencies running regardless of who is in the White House. These officials write policies, manage budgets, and enforce regulations, often acting independently of elected leaders. Critics argue that these bureaucrats have their own agendas and can sabotage, delay, or ignore policies they disagree with, making it nearly impossible for any president to fully control the government. Beyond government agencies, the deep state is also linked to Wall Street, big tech, and mainstream media. Large financial institutions like Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and J.P. Morgan Chase wield immense influence over economic policies, often having direct ties to government officials. Meanwhile, tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Twitter have been accused of manipulating information and censoring dissent, working in alignment with intelligence agencies. The media, often owned by a handful of powerful corporations, helps reinforce deep state narratives by shaping public opinion and silencing alternative viewpoints. Ultimately, whether by design or by consequence, these institutions and individuals form a network of power that remains in control regardless of election outcomes. While the deep state may not have an official name or headquarters, its influence is felt across multiple aspects of government, finance, military, and media, guiding policies and protecting its own interests. The idea of a hidden ruling class influencing government policies from behind the scenes is not new. Throughout history, different civilizations have seen power structures that resemble what we now call the deep state, networks of elites, military officials, and bureaucrats who operate beyond public scrutiny. These historical examples provide insight into how such power structures can emerge and function. One of the earliest examples comes from ancient Rome. While Rome was officially a republic, real power often rested with the senatorial elite and military generals rather than elected officials. Figures like Julius Caesar and Augustus rose to power by navigating the political and military structures controlled by these elites. Even after emperors took over, the Praetorian Guard, Rome's secretive military force, often acted as kingmakers, assassinating emperors who didn't align with their interests. This shows how a seemingly democratic system can be controlled from the shadows by unelected forces. In more modern history, the Ottoman Empire had a similar hidden power structure. The Janissaries, an elite military corps, and the Sultan's advisors frequently overruled or manipulated the Sultan's decisions, acting as a deep state that controlled the empire's direction. Over time, the Janissaries became so powerful that they began removing and installing sultans at will, much like intelligence agencies and military elites influence modern leaders. A direct historical example of the term deep state comes from Turkey in the 20th century. The Derin Devlet deep state was a network of military officers, intelligence agents, and business elites who worked behind the scenes to control Turkish politics. Whenever elected leaders attempted to challenge this system, they faced military coups or political pressure. This version of the deep state operated in secrecy, maintaining control over national policies even when civilian governments changed. In the United States, multiple incidents suggest the presence of deep state-like operations. During the Cold War, the CIA engaged in covert actions, regime changes, and assassinations without full approval from elected officials. Programs like Operation Mockingbird involved the CIA influencing media outlets to push government narratives, raising concerns about unelected officials controlling public perception. The JFK assassination is often cited as a potential example of the deep state removing a president who threatened their power, as Kennedy had openly spoken against the CIA and military-industrial complex before his death. Even in more recent years, figures like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange have exposed government surveillance programs and covert operations that were kept hidden from the public. These revelations suggest that the deep state isn't just a conspiracy theory but a reality in which unelected officials and institutions wield power beyond the reach of democratic control. Whether in ancient Rome, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, or the modern U.S., history shows that when power is concentrated in hidden networks of bureaucrats, military leaders, and intelligence agencies, elected leaders often struggle to govern freely. This pattern suggests that the deep state, whether called by that name or another, has been a feature of politics for centuries. One of the strongest arguments for the existence of a deep state is the way government policies remain largely unchanged, regardless of which political party or president is in power. While elected officials campaign on promises of reform, once in office, they often find themselves unable, or unwilling, to challenge the entrenched bureaucratic machine that actually controls policymaking. This suggests that unelected officials, rather than voters, hold the real power. A prime example of deep state influence is U.S. foreign policy. Presidents from both parties have promised to end wars and reduce military involvement, yet the United States continues to engage in prolonged conflicts. Barack Obama campaigned on ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, yet drone strikes and military operations expanded under his administration. Donald Trump also pledged to withdraw troops from the Middle East, but his own officials, including Secretary of Defense James Mattis and National Security Advisor John Bolton, actively resisted those efforts. When Trump announced troop withdrawals, military leaders delayed or ignored his orders, showing that elected officials often lack control over their own government's actions. The intelligence community also plays a major role in shaping policy outside the democratic process. Agencies like the CIA, NSA, and FBI have access to vast amounts of classified information, allowing them to operate in ways that even the president may not fully understand. Covert operations, regime changes, and surveillance programs continue regardless of public opposition. The revelations by Edward Snowden in 2013, which exposed mass government surveillance, showed that intelligence agencies had been spying on American citizens without their knowledge or consent. These programs had bipartisan support among career officials, despite being unconstitutional. Another area of deep state control is economic policy. The Federal Reserve, a private entity with no direct oversight from elected officials, controls the nation's monetary policy. While Congress and the President can propose economic plans, the Fed makes critical decisions on interest rates and money supply without public input. Similarly, major financial institutions like BlackRock and Goldman Sachs often have deep connections to government, ensuring that economic policies always favor large corporations, regardless of which party is in power. Even domestic policies are influenced by unelected bureaucrats. Regulatory agencies like the CDC, FDA, and EPA create and enforce policies that impact millions of people, yet these agencies are run by career officials, not elected representatives. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how bureaucrats, such as Dr. Anthony Fauci and CDC officials, held more power over national policy than elected leaders, implementing lockdowns and mandates with little oversight. Ultimately, the deep state's influence over policy is most evident in its ability to resist, delay, or redirect policies that challenge its power. When elected officials attempt major reforms, they face intense pressure, leaks, investigations, or outright sabotage from within the system. This raises the question, are politicians actually in charge, or are they simply figureheads while unelected officials maintain control? One of the strongest arguments for the existence of the deep state is the way presidents often struggle to enact their policies, even when they hold full control of the government. Despite being the elected leaders of their countries, many presidents face opposition, manipulation, and even sabotage from intelligence agencies, military officials, and bureaucrats who seem to operate with their own agenda. This raises an important question: are presidents truly in charge, or are they just figureheads? A clear example of this is John F. Kennedy, who openly clashed with the intelligence and military establishment. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Kennedy realized that the CIA had misled him about the operation's chances of success. He fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, vowed to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and sought to withdraw U.S. troops from Vietnam, moves that directly threatened the military-industrial complex. Shortly after, he was assassinated, and many believe the deep state played a role in his death. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, immediately reversed Kennedy's policies and escalated the Vietnam War, benefiting the same military and intelligence interests Kennedy opposed. Another case is Richard Nixon, who was forced to resign after the Watergate scandal. While Nixon was guilty of corruption, leaks and intelligence operations against him suggest a deeper effort to remove him from power. Before Watergate, Nixon had angered the intelligence community by attempting to limit CIA power and normalize relations with China and the Soviet Union, moves that threatened the establishment. The deep throat informant who exposed Watergate was later revealed to be FBI Deputy Director Mark Felt, showing that Nixon's own intelligence agencies worked against him. Fast forward to Donald Trump, who ran on a platform of fighting the deep state but quickly found himself surrounded by it. After taking office, Trump was repeatedly undermined by intelligence agencies, military leaders, and career bureaucrats. His attempt to improve relations with Russia was blocked by the Russiagate investigation, which was later revealed to be based on fabricated evidence pushed by intelligence operatives. When he tried to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan, military officials either delayed his orders or lied to him about troop numbers. Even after he lost the 2020 election, the media, tech companies, and intelligence officials worked together to silence him, showing that no president, no matter how powerful, can completely escape the deep state's grip. The pattern is clear: when a president challenges the establishment, they face investigations, leaks, sabotage, or even assassination. Meanwhile, those who align with the deep state, like George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, face no real resistance. This suggests that the presidency itself is not the highest level of power, but rather a controlled position within a much larger system. One of the most powerful tools of the deep state is its ability to control public perception through the mainstream media. While many believe the media operates independently, historical evidence suggests that intelligence agencies, corporate elites, and government insiders have long influenced the news, ensuring that certain narratives are promoted while others are suppressed. If the deep state truly exists, then controlling the flow of information is one of its most critical weapons. A key historical example is Operation Mockingbird, a covert CIA program from the 1950s and 1960s in which intelligence operatives infiltrated major news organizations, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS, and Time magazine. Journalists were secretly working for the CIA, spreading propaganda, suppressing damaging information, and shaping public opinion in ways that benefited the establishment. Though officially exposed in the 1970s, there is evidence that similar tactics continue today, just in more sophisticated forms. One major way the deep state influences the media is through the use of anonymous sources. Whenever a news report cites unnamed intelligence officials or government insiders, it is often a way for the deep state to leak selective information that serves its agenda. A prime example was the Russiagate scandal, in which news outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times relied on intelligence sources to push the false narrative that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. This narrative, later debunked, was used to undermine Trump's presidency and justify surveillance on his administration. Beyond news reporting, big tech platforms like Google, Facebook, and Twitter also play a role in shaping the narrative and silencing dissent. In recent years, social media companies have censored or deplatformed individuals who question establishment narratives on issues like COVID-19, election fraud, and foreign policy. These platforms frequently collaborate with intelligence agencies, as seen in the Twitter files, where leaked documents revealed that the FBI and CIA had direct influence over content moderation. This suggests that modern censorship is not just about corporate policies, it is an extension of deep state control. Perhaps the most alarming aspect of this media influence is how it destroys opposition voices. When politicians, whistleblowers, or journalists expose corruption, they are discredited, labeled as conspiracy theorists, or outright silenced. Figures like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange exposed illegal government surveillance and war crimes, yet instead of being hailed as heroes, they were hunted down by intelligence agencies and painted as national threats. Meanwhile, mainstream media obediently repeated the deep state's talking points, ensuring that the public saw them as villains rather than truth-tellers. In summary, the deep state does not need to control every journalist, it only needs to control the flow of information. By influencing major news networks, using intelligence leaks to manipulate narratives, and silencing dissenting voices, it ensures that the public only hears the version of reality that serves its interests. Whether through fear, deception, or outright censorship, the media acts as the deep state's most effective weapon in maintaining its power. If the deep state exists as a shadow government operating beyond democratic control, then its most powerful enforcers are undoubtedly the intelligence agencies. Organizations like the CIA, FBI, NSA, and DIA hold immense power, operating in secrecy with little oversight. They have the ability to spy, manipulate, and even remove leaders who threaten their control. Rather than serving the public, these agencies often appear to serve the interests of the permanent ruling class. A prime example of this is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Many believe that Kennedy's attempts to reduce CIA power, end the Vietnam War, and challenge the military-industrial complex made him a target. After his assassination, official investigations were obstructed, key witnesses disappeared, and intelligence agencies refused to release classified documents. Decades later, even mainstream reports admit that the CIA withheld crucial information from the Warren Commission, fueling speculation that the agency was involved in JFK's death. Beyond assassinations, intelligence agencies use covert operations, disinformation campaigns, and illegal surveillance to control politicians. Programs like CNTLPRO, run by the FBI, illegally spied on, harassed, and sabotaged civil rights leaders, journalists, and political activists who were seen as threats to the establishment. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of their main targets. FBI officials sent him threatening letters, trying to force him into silence or suicide. Intelligence agencies also manipulate foreign governments through regime change operations. The CIA has overthrown multiple leaders who opposed U.S. corporate and military interests, including Iran's Mohammad Mossadegh, 1953, Chile's Salvador Allende, 1973, and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, 2011. These interventions, often justified as promoting democracy, instead installed puppet governments that served elite interests. If intelligence agencies are willing to remove foreign leaders, it raises the question, would they do the same to American presidents who challenge their power? Even more alarming is their control over domestic politics. Leaked documents and whistleblowers have exposed how the CIA and FBI influence elections, spy on political figures, and control information flow. The Russia collusion hoax is a perfect example. Intelligence officials created a false narrative that Donald Trump was a Russian agent, leading to years of investigations and media propaganda. This effort, later proven to be based on fabricated evidence, was used to undermine Trump's presidency. Similarly, before the 2020 election, intelligence officials worked with social media companies to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story, falsely labeling it as Russian disinformation to protect Joe Biden. Ultimately, intelligence agencies function outside the law, answering to no one. They operate in secrecy, shape national policies, and have the power to remove or silence leaders who threaten their interests. Whether through surveillance, propaganda, blackmail, or even assassination, these agencies act as the deep state's enforcers, ensuring that no president, politician, or activist can truly challenge their control. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for the existence of a deep state is the military-industrial complex, a network of defense contractors, military leaders, and government officials who profit from endless war. While politicians claim that military actions are necessary for national security, history shows that many wars are manufactured, prolonged, or escalated to serve the financial interests of defense companies and the elites who control them. This issue was first warned about by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1961. In his farewell address, he cautioned that the growing alliance between the military, private defense contractors, and government officials could lead to a dangerous system where war becomes a business rather than a necessity. His warning went largely ignored, and today, the United States spends hundreds of billions of dollars per year on military operations, many of which never achieve clear objectives. The clearest example of this was the Iraq War, 2003 to 2011. The U.S. invaded Iraq based on false claims that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. Years later, it was revealed that these claims were fabricated, yet the war led to massive profits for defense contractors like Halliburton, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. Many of the same officials who pushed for war, such as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, had direct financial ties to these companies, proving that the war wasn't about protecting the American people, but about enriching the deep state. Another example is Afghanistan, where the U.S. remained for 20 years, spending over $2 trillion. Despite this, the war ended in failure, with the Taliban reclaiming control in a matter of days after the U.S. withdrawal. The only true winners were military contractors, who made billions supplying weapons, vehicles, and private security forces for an occupation that intelligence agencies and military leaders knew was unwinnable. Leaked reports, such as the Afghanistan Papers, revealed that top officials lied to the public about progress in the war while continuing to fund defense corporations. Even under presidents who claim to oppose war, the military-industrial complex ensures that conflicts continue. Donald Trump campaigned on ending forever wars, yet under his presidency, the military budget increased, drone strikes expanded, and defense contractors thrived. When Trump attempted to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan, military officials resisted or outright lied to him about troop levels to delay the process. This shows that even the president is not truly in charge of the military. Unelected officials and defense executives dictate war policy. Currently, the Ukraine-Russia war serves as another example. The U.S. government has sent over $100 billion in military aid to Ukraine, with much of that money flowing directly into the pockets of U.S. defense contractors. Meanwhile, politicians and media outlets, many of whom have financial ties to the defense industry, continue to push for escalating the conflict. War, for the deep state, is not about national security, it is about power, control, and profit. Ultimately, the military-industrial complex ensures that war remains a constant, profitable business. It overrides the will of elected leaders, manufactures conflicts, and manipulates public opinion to justify endless military spending. Whether in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, or Ukraine, the pattern remains the same: the deep state ensures that war never ends, because war is too profitable to stop. The deep state is not confined to the borders of one country, it operates on a global scale, influencing international relations, economics, and policies in ways that are often invisible to the general public. While national governments are supposed to represent the interests of their people, the deep state, comprising intelligence agencies, global corporations, and military elites, often drives foreign policy decisions to serve its own agenda, which is typically focused on maintaining control, securing resources, and ensuring profits for the elite. One example of global deep state influence is the global surveillance network. Agencies like the NSA, CIA, and GCHQ, UK's intelligence agency, operate under the guise of protecting national security, but in reality, they gather intelligence not only on foreign adversaries but also on citizens and governments worldwide. Programs like PRISM exposed how the NSA collects data on millions of individuals globally, often without their consent or knowledge. This data is not just used for counterterrorism efforts, it is often employed to control political movements, suppress dissent, and monitor potential threats to the status quo. Another area of global influence is military interventions. The United States, often seen as the global leader in military power, engages in covert operations and regime change programs that have global ramifications. The CIA has been involved in overthrowing governments across the world: Iran, 1953, Chile, 1973, Guatemala, 1954, and Libya, 2011, all in the name of promoting democracy or ensuring national security. But in reality, these actions often serve corporate interests, particularly in the energy sector, and ensure that foreign governments remain aligned with U.S. interests. These operations are frequently executed by shadow networks of diplomats, military officials, and intelligence operatives who operate outside the realm of official diplomacy or public scrutiny. The Bilderberg Group is another example of global elite influence. This annual meeting brings together political leaders, CEOs, and international financial moguls, with no press allowed. The discussions and decisions made during these meetings shape global economic and political policies, yet the public has no access to these deliberations. The secrecy of such meetings and the way they bring together powerful individuals from around the world further perpetuate the idea that the deep state operates above national governments to ensure a system of global control by a small group of elites. In the European Union, the European Central Bank, ECB, and other unelected bureaucratic bodies exert immense influence over the economies of member countries. Despite the Eurozone's democratic institutions, economic decisions, such as austerity measures and fiscal policies, are often made by unelected technocrats who serve the interests of global financial elites rather than the citizens of Europe. These technocrats can overrule national governments, effectively shaping policy from behind the scenes, thus revealing the deep state's ability to influence not just national but international governance. Moreover, international trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, highlight how corporate elites, who often have deep ties to intelligence and military agencies, work to push global agreements that benefit them financially. These agreements frequently undermine the sovereignty of national governments and prioritize the interests of multinational corporations over the welfare of local populations. Finally, organizations like the United Nations, UN, and the World Economic Forum, WEF, are often accused of being extensions of deep state control. While they claim to serve global interests, their policies tend to favor the elite over the common citizen. The UN's World Health Organization, WHO, for example, gained significant attention during the COVID-19 pandemic for its role in influencing global health policies that were often at odds with national sovereignty. Similarly, the WEF's Great Reset initiative has been seen by some as a way to impose global governance under the control of corporate elites and international institutions, further cementing the idea of a global deep state. In conclusion, the deep state's global influence reaches beyond national borders, impacting foreign policy, economic structures, and international relations in ways that benefit the elite and undermine democracy. Through covert operations, economic control, and manipulation of international institutions, the deep state works to maintain a global system that ensures the interests of powerful corporations, intelligence agencies, and political elites are served above the needs of the general population. In the digital age, big tech companies, such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and Microsoft, have become critical players in the influence operations of the deep state, operating as modern-day tools of surveillance, censorship, and manipulation. These companies, many of which control vast amounts of personal data, have the power to shape public opinion, control information, and even influence elections, making them indispensable in maintaining the deep state's grip on power. The relationship between big tech and the deep state was made more apparent during the 2020 U.S. presidential election, when multiple social media platforms engaged in widespread censorship of information that went against the official narrative. The most notable example was the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, which, just weeks before the election, was flagged by Twitter and Facebook as Russian disinformation, despite the lack of evidence supporting this claim. Emails on the laptop suggested improper dealings between Hunter Biden and foreign companies, which could have influenced his father Joe Biden's presidential candidacy. By censoring this story, social media giants effectively protected the political establishment and ensured that certain narratives were not given the visibility they deserved. The involvement of big tech in election interference goes beyond censorship. These companies are directly connected to the intelligence community, often through personnel connections and collaboration. For example, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg has acknowledged the company's cooperation with the FBI regarding the Hunter Biden laptop story. Similarly, Google has been accused of manipulating search results and using its search algorithm to suppress conservative viewpoints or alternative media narratives that challenge the mainstream agenda. This alignment with government and intelligence agencies raises questions about whether these tech giants are working as part of a larger deep state network to maintain control over information flow. Moreover, data collection and surveillance are crucial components of how big tech feeds into the deep state's efforts. The vast amount of personal data that companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon collect allows them to build detailed profiles of users, which can be used not only for targeted advertising but also for political manipulation and control. This data can be sold to political campaigns, governments, and corporate clients, enabling the deep state to manipulate public opinion, influence elections, and monitor dissent. Amazon's cloud services have also been found to house government surveillance programs, further cementing the role of big tech as an arm of the state. Another way big tech serves the deep state is through the spread of disinformation. While they claim to combat fake news and misinformation, these companies often spread their own narratives, shaping the way certain issues are perceived. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, platforms like YouTube censored content that questioned official government stances on lockdowns, mask mandates, or vaccine efficacy. Independent doctors, scientists, and whistleblowers who voiced alternative opinions were quickly removed or demonetized, while official narratives were amplified. This not only suppresses critical voices but ensures that the deep state's agenda remains unchallenged. The deep ties between big tech and government raise serious concerns about the concentration of power in the hands of a few private companies that operate with the support and collaboration of the state. The censorship industrial complex, where government officials collaborate with private companies to limit speech, is a growing threat to freedom. Many critics argue that big tech has become a surveillance state in itself, where the deep state uses the power of these corporations to monitor and control populations, track dissent, and ensure that only certain viewpoints prevail. Ultimately, big tech's role as a modern extension of the deep state cannot be overstated. From censorship and surveillance to election interference and the manipulation of information, these companies are playing an increasingly powerful role in shaping the political landscape. The combination of private tech giants and state power forms a digital deep state that controls the flow of information, restricts access to alternative viewpoints, and ensures the continuation of the elite's interests. One of the key elements that sustain the deep state is the deeply entrenched system of political corruption that exists within governments across the world, particularly in the United States. Politicians, rather than serving the will of the people, often serve the interests of corporate elites, military-industrial complexes, and intelligence agencies, creating a symbiotic relationship where both the deep state and the political class benefit from maintaining the status quo. This mutual benefit ensures the deep state's power is protected, and any efforts to challenge it are quickly neutralized. At the core of this relationship is the revolving door between the private sector and government positions. Politicians, after serving in office, often find lucrative positions in industries they once regulated or helped to create laws for. For example, former defense secretaries often end up in high-paying roles at defense contractors, while former lawmakers join the boards of large multinational corporations. These arrangements allow corporations to have direct influence over the political system, ensuring that policies favorable to their interests are consistently enacted. This system of patronage and bribery ensures that powerful elites can continue to pull the strings behind the scenes, while the general public remains largely unaware of the extent of their influence. The deep state also manipulates political campaigns through lobbying, corporate donations, and super PACs. The influence of corporate donors has increasingly undermined the principle of democratic representation, as politicians are beholden to corporate interests and lobbyists who fund their campaigns. This creates a situation where elected officials are no longer representing the interests of their constituents but instead are working to enrich the very elites who funded their rise to power. In this way, the deep state ensures that political figures are effectively captured, with policies serving the interests of the military-industrial complex, big tech companies, and global corporations rather than the needs of the electorate. Furthermore, political corruption and bribery are often used as tools by the deep state to compromise politicians and ensure their loyalty. By offering politicians financial rewards or political favors, the deep state can easily blackmail or manipulate those in power to enact policies that further the elite's agenda. This is often done through campaign contributions, but it can also include sweetheart deals, land grants, or favorable treatment to corporations linked to the deep state. Politicians, in turn, often turn a blind eye to these unethical practices, knowing that their career advancement depends on maintaining the favor of these powerful entities. The intelligence community is another key player in the deep state's control over politics. The CIA, FBI, and NSA not only gather intelligence but also exert influence over domestic and foreign political outcomes. Surveillance, blackmail, and covert actions are frequently employed to remove or compromise political figures who pose a threat to the established order. For instance, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was known for monitoring and undermining political leaders who opposed U.S. government policies, such as Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy. Modern intelligence agencies continue to engage in such activities, including espionage, surveillance of political figures, and influencing electoral outcomes to maintain the status quo. The media also plays a key role in political corruption by shaping narratives to protect the interests of the deep state. Mainstream media outlets, often owned or influenced by corporate elites, provide coverage that supports the agenda of the political establishment. By spinning or censoring stories, the media ensures that negative information about politicians or powerful corporations is minimized, while supporting the political class's decisions that benefit the deep state's network of influence. This leads to a situation where the public is misinformed, and politicians are able to carry out corrupt activities without facing significant scrutiny. In sum, the relationship between political corruption and the deep state is a self-perpetuating cycle. The political class benefits from financial rewards, campaign donations, and career advancement, while the deep state maintains its power through lobbying, manipulation, and surveillance. Together, they form a system that works to protect elite interests and undermine democracy, leaving ordinary citizens with little say in how their governments operate. This alliance allows the deep state to thrive, shielded from accountability, while the political system remains largely subservient to the needs of the elite. When Donald Trump entered the political arena, he did so as an outsider, a billionaire businessman who had little in common with the typical political elite. From his first day in office, he made it clear that his administration was determined to challenge the deep state, the network of unelected bureaucrats, intelligence agencies, corporate elites, and military-industrial complex that many believed had too much power over American politics. His presidency became a high-stakes battle between the political establishment and a populist outsider determined to drain the swamp. Trump's strategy to fight the deep state centered on several key areas: government transparency, dismantling bureaucratic power, and challenging the military-industrial complex. 1. Government transparency and accountability. Trump often criticized the bureaucratic deep state for its lack of accountability, specifically calling out agencies like the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice, DOJ. During his presidency, he sought to reduce the influence of these agencies and limit their ability to operate in secret. One of his major points of contention was the Russia investigation, which he believed was a deep state-driven attempt to undermine his presidency. He framed the investigation, led by special counsel Robert Mueller, as a product of a corrupt system, one that used false intelligence and partisan motivations to hinder his administration. Trump also called for government reform to make agencies more accountable, including efforts to push for reducing the power of unelected bureaucrats who were seen as acting against his agenda. His appointment of outsiders, like former military leaders and business executives, to key government positions was a strategic attempt to weaken the hold of career politicians and bureaucrats who were suspected of working with the deep state. 2. Challenging the military-industrial complex. Trump's relationship with the military-industrial complex was complex. On the one hand, he significantly increased military spending during his presidency, but on the other, he frequently expressed frustration with endless wars and the way defense contractors exploited the U.S. military for profit. Trump's campaign promises of "America First" and "bringing the troops home" signaled his desire to end what he considered fruitless, profit-driven military interventions in places like Syria and Afghanistan. He was especially vocal about how wars and defense spending were managed by career military officials and contractors who benefited from perpetual conflict. Trump's desire to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria and reduce American involvement in Afghanistan led to tension with top military officials, some of whom were seen as aligned with the interests of the military-industrial complex. This conflict came to a head when Trump began to fire senior officials in the Department of Defense, replacing them with those who were more aligned with his vision of scaling back military engagement. His attempt to bring peace agreements in North Korea and reduce tensions in the Middle East were clear signals that he was challenging the deep state's war-driven agenda. 3. Challenging the intelligence agencies. One of the most significant aspects of Trump's battle against the deep state was his relationship with intelligence agencies like the CIA and FBI. He consistently clashed with the U.S. intelligence community, accusing them of spying on his campaign and seeking to undermine his presidency. Trump often referred to the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election as a witch hunt and a product of a corrupt deep state agenda. His desire to expose the deep state corruption was highlighted by his public demand for greater transparency in investigations related to his campaign. Trump's efforts to declassify documents related to FBI surveillance, especially surrounding the Russia investigation, were an attempt to expose what he perceived as deep state manipulation. By demanding the release of classified information, he aimed to weaken the hold of the intelligence agencies, placing pressure on them to operate more openly and transparently. 4. The media and the deep state. Trump's disdain for the mainstream media, which he labeled as the fake news, also tied into his broader fight against the deep state. The media, in his view, was not just biased but an active participant in a larger, coordinated effort to undermine his presidency. He argued that the media, often working in tandem with political elites and intelligence agencies, played a key role in shaping public opinion to protect the interests of the deep state. Trump's calls for alternative narratives and his use of social media platforms, especially Twitter, allowed him to directly communicate with the public and bypass what he saw as the media's efforts to suppress the truth. His battle with the media was a reflection of the broader fight against the deep state's control over information, ensuring that he could share his version of events, no matter how it contradicted the official narrative. 5. Opposition to globalism. Trump's criticism of globalist elites and his "America First" agenda was another part of his resistance to the deep state. He railed against international organizations like the United Nations, UN, the World Health Organization, WHO, and the World Economic Forum, WEF, which he claimed were platforms for global elites that were working against American interests. His decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, and his skepticism about global trade deals were all part of his efforts to resist the globalist agenda that many believed was pushed by the deep state to maintain a global power structure controlled by the wealthy elite. Trump's isolationist foreign policy was an effort to break free from what he saw as the influence of global elites and institutions that were pushing for a new world order at the expense of national sovereignty. By emphasizing the interests of American workers, reducing trade deficits, and reasserting national sovereignty, Trump sought to weaken the international structures that often served the deep state's interests. While Donald Trump positioned himself as a fierce opponent of the deep state, many critics argue that his presidency, far from being a true resistance to the shadowy forces of bureaucrats, intelligence agencies, and corporate elites, actually illustrated how he was, in some ways, a puppet of the very system he claimed to fight. This viewpoint suggests that despite his rhetoric and occasional pushback against certain elements of the deep state, Trump ultimately worked within the framework of power that these elites have built over decades. The notion of Trump as a puppet of the deep state is often supported by a series of actions, contradictions, and the nature of his political alliances that hint at an underlying complicity with the very powers he seemingly fought against. 1. Continuation of deep state policies. Despite Trump's promises to drain the swamp and radically change U.S. foreign and domestic policies, many of the policies enacted during his presidency were not dramatically different from those of his predecessors. For instance, while Trump campaigned against endless foreign wars and promised to bring American troops home, his administration ended up increasing military spending and continuing military operations in the Middle East. His rhetoric may have changed, but his policies were largely in alignment with the military-industrial complex, one of the most entrenched aspects of the deep state. His hawkish stances on issues like Iran and Syria, as well as his continued support for defense contractors, suggested that he was more complicit with the powers he had once criticized than he let on. Moreover, Trump's deep ties with powerful figures in the banking and corporate sectors, many of whom are connected to the globalist elite, raise questions about his true stance on economic and financial reform. Rather than radically altering the system that perpetuates wealth inequality and corporate dominance, Trump often catered to corporate interests, such as tax cuts for the wealthy and deregulation of major industries. In many cases, these actions reflected the interests of the deep state rather than any genuine challenge to it. 2. The influence of key allies with deep state ties. Throughout his administration, Trump surrounded himself with individuals who were deeply entrenched in the political establishment. Figures like Rex Tillerson, former Secretary of State and former CEO of ExxonMobil, James Mattis, former Secretary of Defense and retired general, and John Bolton, National Security Advisor and a prominent figure in the military-industrial complex, were all linked to the very forces Trump often criticized. These individuals were seen by many as representatives of the deep state, pushing policies that aligned more with the interests of global elites than the average American voter. Despite his populist rhetoric, Trump frequently promoted policies that served the interests of the elite class, whether in terms of foreign interventions, military spending, or deregulation. Trump's appointments to key positions of power, especially in the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies, often included individuals who had ties to the military-industrial complex or big corporate interests, further reinforcing the idea that Trump, while appearing as a populist leader, was intertwined with the very entities he claimed to oppose. 3. The Russia investigation and deep state manipulation. While Trump spent much of his presidency railing against the deep state's role in the Russia investigation, which he viewed as a politically motivated effort to undermine him, his dependence on Russia-related policies and his close ties to Russian oligarchs raised questions about his genuine opposition to the forces he was criticizing. Critics argue that Trump's public struggle with the intelligence community over the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election was, in part, a distraction designed to mask his own entanglements with powerful foreign and corporate interests. His failure to fully challenge the globalist agenda or to hold accountable those who colluded to manipulate elections suggests that the alleged deep state was able to keep him within its orbit, regardless of his rhetoric. Moreover, the fact that Trump's personal and business ties to foreign governments, particularly in Russia and the Middle East, were never thoroughly investigated, despite the clear conflicts of interest they presented, further casts doubt on his ability to challenge the deep state in any meaningful way. 4. Ties to the financial elite. Trump's rise to power was, in part, supported by powerful figures in the financial sector, including the banking industry and wealthy corporate elites. Throughout his presidency, his tax policies and deregulation efforts overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest Americans, which critics argue indicates that Trump was not interested in dismantling the financial structures that support the deep state. Instead, his policies often served to entrench the economic power of the very elites he claimed to be at odds with. Trump's real estate empire, which has long been connected to foreign investments and international oligarchs, further suggests that his relationship with global finance and the powerful elite was more complex than he let on. The financial interests that helped to fuel his career may have, in some cases, influenced his decisions as president, making him susceptible to the deep state's financial manipulation. His relationship with Wall Street and financial regulators raised questions about his ability to stand up to the financial elite, particularly when he repeatedly allowed the banking sector to operate largely unchecked. 5. Media manipulation and controlled opposition. Another argument for Trump's role as a puppet of the deep state lies in his relationship with the mainstream media. While he frequently criticized the media, calling it fake news, Trump's own use of the media to maintain his political persona and promote his agenda indicated a more cooperative relationship than antagonistic. By positioning himself as the anti-establishment figure battling the corrupt elite, Trump reinforced a narrative that helped the deep state maintain its control by fostering division and chaos in the political system. Trump's ability to consistently distract the public with divisive rhetoric, focusing on issues like immigration, political correctness, and deep state conspiracies, allowed the true mechanisms of control, such as the military-industrial complex, financial elites, and corporate lobbying, to continue operating under the radar. His public persona as a populist was, for many, an effective distraction from the underlying forces that were still driving U.S. policy. While Donald Trump's presidency was hailed by many as an attempt to break away from the traditional political establishment, his actions and policies ultimately revealed a far darker truth. He became a tool of the deep state, reinforcing the very systems of control and oppression that he claimed to oppose. Through a combination of complicity with elite interests, undermining democratic institutions, and increasing suffering for the common people, Trump's leadership ultimately worsened the lives of many Americans and left them at the mercy of the same powerful forces that had always controlled the political landscape. 1. Trump's economic policies, a boost for the rich, a burden for the poor. One of the most glaring issues with Trump's presidency was the economic policies he championed. While he promised to deliver jobs, tax cuts, and prosperity to the American people, his economic decisions overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest Americans and corporations, exacerbating the already extreme wealth inequality in the U.S. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, for instance, was a massive tax break for the richest individuals and large corporations, while many middle and lower-income Americans received only temporary relief. In practice, these tax cuts serve to enrich the wealthy elite, whose interests are deeply aligned with the deep state, rather than the average worker. Trump's administration also pursued deregulation, especially in environmental protections, labor rights, and financial oversight. This deregulation empowered large corporations, often at the expense of working-class Americans. For example, his rollback of regulations meant that large corporations could pollute the environment more freely, leading to health problems and economic instability for many communities, especially those in rural and industrial areas. Rather than challenge the corporate elites that dominate the economic system, Trump's policies further entrenched their power, making life even harder for the average person. 2. Erosion of worker rights and unchecked corporate power. Despite his promises to create jobs and help the working class, Trump's administration focused on empowering corporations and dismantling workers' rights. His policies encouraged a corporate-driven economy, where profits took precedence over human needs. Trump's focus on cutting regulations for businesses allowed employers to exploit workers without facing the same scrutiny, reducing wages and stripping away vital labor protections. His anti-union stance weakened the power of labor unions, preventing workers from organizing and fighting for fair wages and benefits. Trump also turned a blind eye to the outsourcing of jobs and the offshoring of manufacturing, which devastated local communities that once relied on these industries. He often used rhetoric to promise job creation, but his policies, such as the tax cuts for corporations, failed to lead to substantial job growth in the areas that most needed it. Instead, companies reinvested the savings into stock buybacks and executive bonuses, further siphoning wealth from the average American and strengthening the deep state's control over the economy. 3. Divisive rhetoric and social chaos. Trump's rhetoric throughout his presidency was consistently divisive. By pitting Americans against each other, whether through race, class, or political affiliation, Trump amplified existing tensions and encouraged polarization. His use of hate-filled rhetoric, including his comments about immigrants, people of color, and various political opponents, helped divide the nation at a time when unity was more critical than ever. While he claimed to represent the forgotten man and the working class, his words and actions often undermined the social fabric of the country, causing widespread anger, fear, and division. This divisiveness played into the hands of the deep state, which thrives on social chaos and conflict. By promoting racial and cultural divisions, Trump distracted the public from the more pressing issues of economic exploitation, corporate control, and elite power. His ability to manipulate the public discourse helped maintain the status quo, as people focused on cultural battles rather than the systemic issues that perpetuated their struggles. 4. A disastrous handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was one of the most damaging failures of his presidency. His downplaying of the virus, refusal to implement a national strategy, and spread of misinformation led to hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths. His lack of leadership during the pandemic exacerbated the economic and social impacts of the virus, leaving working-class families and essential workers to bear the brunt of the crisis. Moreover, Trump's repeated conflicts with public health experts, like Dr. Anthony Fauci, and his promotion of unproven treatments further undermined the nation's response. He favored economic concerns over the health and safety of the American people, pushing for quick reopenings and maintaining business as usual, even as the virus spread uncontrollably. His inaction and inability to mobilize federal resources in a coherent and effective manner left local governments to fend for themselves, increasing the suffering of everyday Americans. 5. Undermining democracy and corrupting institutions. Trump's presidency was marked by his repeated attempts to undermine democratic institutions and subvert the will of the people. From his false claims about election fraud in 2020 to his encouragement of violence on January 6, Trump's actions led to a constitutional crisis that threatened the integrity of American democracy. His refusal to accept the election results and his subsequent attempt to overturn the election demonstrated his lack of respect for democratic norms and his willingness to destroy the very institutions he was elected to serve. This desire to maintain power at any cost aligned Trump with the deep state, which has long been accused of manipulating elections and undermining democratic processes to maintain elite control. By failing to honor the results of a free and fair election, Trump weakened the democratic system that was supposed to represent the will of the people, leaving the nation vulnerable to further authoritarian rule. 6. Enabling the deep state's agenda. While Trump's rhetoric painted him as a fighter against the deep state, his actions often enabled the very systems of control he purported to resist. From his military and defense policies that enriched defense contractors, to his failure to hold corporate elites accountable for their role in the financial crisis and economic inequality, Trump's presidency did little to challenge the corporate-government nexus. In many ways, Trump acted as a puppet for the same powerful elites he claimed to oppose. Rather than dismantle the deep state's influence, Trump's presidency allowed these powerful forces to remain in control while distracting the public with inflammatory rhetoric and culture war issues. By appealing to the populist base, he provided a veneer of resistance to the status quo, but his policies continued to benefit the elites that maintain the power structures he claimed to oppose. This made life increasingly difficult for the common people who were led to believe that Trump was their champion, only to see their lives remain stagnant or worsen under his administration. Donald Trump's presidency ultimately proved to be detrimental to the very people he promised to represent. By aligning himself with the deep state's economic interests, corporate elites, and military-industrial complex, he perpetuated the systems that caused inequality, division, and suffering for the American public. While he presented himself as an outsider fighting for the common man, his presidency empowered the forces of control and corruption, leaving the working class to face the consequences of his policies. Far from challenging the deep state, Trump became a tool of the system, furthering the agendas that oppressed those he was supposed to defend. The relationship between Donald Trump and the deep state is a complex and paradoxical one, filled with contradictions and intrigue. On one hand, Trump positioned himself as the ultimate outsider, the one who would disrupt the entrenched power structures that have long dictated the fate of the American people. His fiery rhetoric, calls to drain the swamp, and promises to fight the corrupt elites resonated with millions of Americans who felt ignored and betrayed by the political establishment. However, as we have seen, Trump's presidency often reinforced the very systems he claimed to oppose. His policies, ranging from massive tax cuts for the wealthy to deregulation that favored corporations, largely benefited the elite interests that control much of the nation's economy and politics. His actions, at times, served the agendas of the military-industrial complex, big corporations, and powerful financial interests, suggesting that he was less of a threat to the deep state and more of a puppet of the forces he promised to dismantle. In the end, Trump's presidency illuminated the inherent contradictions within the populist rhetoric of challenging the deep state. While his actions and policies might have seemed, on the surface, like an attempt to defy the powers that be, his inability, or unwillingness, to radically alter the system ultimately left many of the common people who trusted him feeling more disillusioned and disempowered than ever. The truth may be that Donald Trump, for all his bold statements and promises, ultimately played a role within the very structure he seemed to oppose. Whether through his alignment with elite interests, his inability to challenge the powers that control the nation, or his failure to deliver meaningful change to those who needed it most, Trump's legacy might ultimately serve as a reminder that the deep state is not easily defeated, and sometimes, those who claim to fight it end up reinforcing its power. In this way, Trump's presidency stands as a cautionary tale about the complexities of power, the illusion of political change, and the forces that shape the destiny of nations, forces that, no matter how hard one may try, can be far harder to escape than anyone realizes. Please like, comment and subscribe. Bye bye guys, see you next week.